challenge, a great passion. My background is finance and management out of school, and honestly, this was not the track I was going to take. And stumbled into golf really through originally just some part-time golf in my early 20s. That rolled into some opportunities to get into club management very quickly in the mid-20s, and then from there, the path just took off from there. So, long time, really in all parts of the business, but strong financial background really set me up for a lot of things that I did in executive role. So done stints with, back in the day, it was, I think it started with Golf Enterprises, really Jim Colbert Golf actually.
Yeah.
For a little bit of time in Golf Enterprises with Bob Williams, who Joe knows really well. He used to be with Merrick Golf. From there went to COO and CEO of KSL Fairways. After we transacted there, came back, spent a few years with Joe at American Golf, until had the opportunity to hook up with KSL again. So a lot of my background, you'll hear the themes being with KSL Capital. It used to be called KSL Recreation, and a private equity group that I've been really, really close with. The S is Mike Shannon, one of the smartest and, just a great personal friend, and, known Mike since the early 90s, through much of my career. And, we reunited. I've been an investor with KSL through much of that time, and then reunited with the gang. At that point, it turned KSL Capital, and we did the Club Court transaction in 2006, and was COO and COO president, and helped until we transacted again with Apollo for that time. And then most recently, this is just, it's actually been, I think, it's not even, safe to say, but it's been outstanding what we've done at Heritage Golf. I've had a blast. We had the opportunity to transact and buy the brand. That was what was interesting to me. It was only 6 clubs, 3 here on Hilton Head, which used to be Merrick Golf, and we've gone through all kinds of different ownership. In fact, Arcus at one point had a presence here on the island. Not really our thesis. The objective was not to get into public golf, but it was really the brand, and 6 clubs didn't have to start with onesies, twosies to build up. And I think Billy's probably going to ask, what do we think of the business? Well, clearly I'm bullish on it because we've gone from 6 clubs to 37 clubs. In 4.5 years, the thesis is really mainly private clubs. But I will tell you, we're doing really well. On the public side of the business, we've got 10, I think about 37 clubs that are either semi-private or public. So it's been a great ride. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Met so many cool people along the way, notwithstanding this guy right here. But a lot of close friends out here, and it's been really good.
Okay, so next year will be, I think, my 40th year in the industry, so I'm the old timer. I used to be the youngest guy in the room, and then one day I wasn't. I wondered how that happened. But it happened. And it's been a terrific run. And yes, there were years when I wondered what I had gotten myself into, but overall, I have to say it's been a very rewarding career. I started with American Golf, and David Price had recruited me. I wanted to be a real estate developer, and I was in business school at USC, the other USC on the West Coast, and met David, and he recruited me to build golf courses and to develop a mixed-use big project he had, and said, look, I said, well, what happens when we're done with that development? You're not a developer in the golf business. He said, well, I'll teach you the golf business. We'll build golf courses, and we did. He was true to his word, and I went to work, and I recruited, my classmate was Dave Pillsbury, who's now the CEO of Invited. He and I met in business school. We were the 2 youngest, and it was interesting to me because there were very few people in business school I would have wanted to get into business with, but David was one of them. So he ended up joining American Golf shortly after I did, a year after I did. And I think we had something like 30 properties. Long story short, he and I became co-CEOs. We had 300 properties in 4 continents, 25,000 employees. We were both hired guns. My background is similar to Mark's. It was finance, and with what they called it FIRE, which was finance, insurance, and real estate. So again, with that real estate focus, it was really actuarial. It was really using tools to demystify making decisions and taking subjectivity out of decision making, which was very appealing to guys like David, who were old school, using tablets like this to do pro formas. So we brought that expertise to American Golf, and it was a good run. I left American Golf 02 and 03, founded Sequoia Golf. And interestingly, I was sharing with Michael Williams this morning, I was at a conference like this, the multi-course conference in Monterey, when the Rockmores approached me, who I'd known for 15 years at American Golf, always trying to buy their assets, and always getting us to the altar, but never closing the deal. And they said, "Hey, would you be interested in buying our 7 golf courses?" And I said, "Look, I don't have time to fool around. You guys are window shopping." They said, No, we're serious. We really want to sell them to you." Well, we got that deal done. I had no idea what it meant to be backable and bankable. And I've never forgotten that, because they said, and others pointed out, "Joe, you'll get the money and you'll figure this out." I may have had, 10% of the purchase price, but I didn't have, or the down payment that was necessary, actually. Yeah, so I think I had like $2 million down of $20 million we needed to close on that transaction. And so I went on a search, and lo and behold, there were plenty of people out there, and I was looking at all the flaws in my career, not all the positives. And everybody's like, "Why do you keep talking about these things that didn't go your way? What about all the things that did go your way?" And long story short, we raised the capital, we bought those 7, and we built that business to 50 at a private equity partner, very similar to Mark, Parthenon Capital. And Parthenon did a deal with you guys early on in that whole cycle. Andy and I did. We ended up having a very good run, and ended up selling the assets, which is what's so important about relationships. Knowing Mark and knowing Eric, at the time Eric Affeld, your CEO, dear friend now, play golf with him out in the desert. We all we're competitors and take the gloves off, battling it out on deals and everything, but slow and behold, deals also make very strange bedfellows, and I ended up selling the entire portfolio of properties to Mark and to Eric in an all-cash transaction in 2014, which was a very, very good lick for me, as they say, and for my partners. And from that, at another conference, was talking to Toro executives who approached me about buying the distribution rights for all of the Toro companies, construction and turf maintenance products in the Western U.S., and I did. So I did that. Bought that in 2015, and then in January of 2023, I just couldn't resist. Everything was going so well, there was like literally nothing to do in the equipment business. We're sold out for 2 years. I'm like, I gotta do something. So my brother Ken had a home on Fripp Island, and we ended up acquiring Fripp Island Golf and Beach Club in January of 2023. 2 golf courses, a deep sea marina, 800 vacation rental, 3 miles of beach, 10 restaurants, 10 pools, about 1,900 membership. And what it is, it's like a land-based big cruise ship. So we get 6,000 to 8,000 people on and off the island every week during season. And we manage all of the recreation assets and own all of the developable properties. Since we closed, we've acquired another $20 million worth of just undeveloped property so that nobody else can develop it. So we're not quite sure what we're gonna do about it. So I'm back in that business. So again, a good run. Worked with some great people over the years, and excited to be back in the game.
Andy Cross, Norcus Golf. Welcome everybody. Thanks for being here. Honored to be on this panel with these guys that have actually run and grown businesses. I've never led one of these efforts. I've been on the ground floor on different teams. My background is a little bit similar. I went to college years ago at the University of Utah, played baseball for them, and was always interested in health and wellness. So I started off managing one of the first large commercial racquetball clubs in the San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles, called Mid-Valley Athletic Club. I met a guy there who was a member named Bob Husband, and he invited me to join a small startup called Sylvan Sports with his partner Jeff Silverstein, and this is 1985. We built that business up to have a small portfolio, I think 14 leases, sold that business to Club Corp in 87, and I worked at Club Corp from 87 to 92. And in 1992, when Bob Husband's non-compete was, we started Cobblestone Golf with a private equity firm, actually at that time it was a venture capital firm, called Brentwood Associates out of LA. We were with them for 5 years, built that business up to ultimately have 50 golf courses and sold it to a combination of American Golf and Club Corp in 1998. And took a little bit of time off, maybe 6 months or so, and same group of guys, we raised capital through a new private equity firm called GTCR Golder Rauner out of Chicago, and that was the start of Heritage Golf Group. That was our next venture. We ended up doing a lot of really great deals in Heritage. I was with that company as a founder up until 2012. I left that company to join Blake Walker, who in my opinion is the best CEO I've ever worked with. Great guy, super smart, really accomplished. And in 2013, we started Arcus, or he started Arcus, and I was along for the ride. 2014, we bought a large portfolio of clubs from Lifestyle REIT CNL, and that kind of put us on the map. Prior to that, we had done 6 one-off privates, and then we had 48 clubs all at one time. Big undertaking. So Blake went out and bought a platform called Eagle Golf from a man named Joe Munch, who many of you probably remember. And that was the platform for Arcus, and that's how it all started. And from there, we have continued to grow. We now have 68 properties across 13 states. Mix of private to public is now about 50-50. When we first started, it was very heavily weighted towards private, and we ended up smoothing that out by doing some really exciting deals that we may or may not talk about. And we're super bullish on the business as well. We think that there's, not that the sky's the limit, as all of us are being pretty choosy now, but there are so many new markets and so many new deals that we're looking at. It's really an exciting time in our business, so happy to be here.
I've never felt more unaccomplished in my life after listening to these 3 guys. That's impressive. What's the collective, 40 years, nearly 100 years of experience sitting right here at this table, just huddling up before this meeting, just listening to these guys
If
start.
you allocate the number of hours we work, it'd be like several lifetimes, right? What's so interesting about this business is it's like the first tee, the 18th green. It's such a relationship business. It's a business of honor. I think it's pretty special. I think we can all agree to that in this room. Both of these guys are customers of mine now, so I wouldn't dare go out and compete with them on the acquisition front, which I love supporting them. And it's all so great. What industry, I guess you could call it incestuous, but it was really forged out of trust and relationships that were born decades ago. And we can still have fun, and we can poke fun at each other, and the pie is big enough for everybody, which is terrific.
So we talk about the good, and we're all bullish. What keeps you guys up at night? What are some potential hurdles golf could go through?
Yeah, I think, look, our view is that trends were improving. I mentioned that this morning leading into COVID. Certainly, already doing the Heritage transaction with the brand, there were a few sleepless nights as we got through the first 6 months or so to see what was going to happen during that time frame. Felt really good about our entry point though, and felt really good about the basis of what was going to, fundamentally the long-term nature. I think from a standpoint of, what we've seen since then, it's just been supercharged. So I think more than anything, for 2 years ago maybe, the thought was, all right, is this sustainable? That's a question everyone asks in the business. I think we're seeing that, in my opinion, the double-digit price increases to overcome inflationary cost pressures, all those things, we're going to have to ease somewhat. I think it's going to be key to member value equation. I think our selection of properties is really crucial. So when we're thinking about acquisitions, location, no matter how good you are at operations, if you're picking the wrong assets, then the wrong locations, and you don't understand on the front end what your competitive set is doing and how you're gonna have a competitive edge, you really have to be ahead of that and understand, you know, what the capital criteria is gonna be, what's the talent selection you need, what's the skill set, what's the structure, how you can get other properties if you are a multi-unit company to help on that. So, you know, from a standpoint, at one point it was, okay, how sustainable are things, because it was a good run for a couple of years. Now that's somewhat past. My view is pricing's holding. But I think as we go forward, what really keeps me up right now is, for us, it's been the rapid growth. How are we gonna assimilate? What was really key for me, and part of the reason, you know, we were planning on going fast. We underwrote 5 to 6 deals a year, which was extremely aggressive in my mind. I wanted to find them and to get the deals that we felt could work and have a high probability of clearing return thresholds. And I might tell you, generally, IRR bases were in the mid-teens, which is somewhat typical of some private equity. And you know, we had so much success so fast. And then what we found on the sell side is sellers were seeing ramp ups as well. And I think their thought process is now the time to get out because it's so good, and they were worried about things going back. That presented a whole nother host. But in my opinion, in looking at things were still mismanaged at their clubs, okay? They were still undercapitalized. Maybe they didn't have the right people. And so even though in their minds we were paying up, it fit in our model to what we felt we could do. So things have worked out really, really well to date. And ultimately right now, if I think about what keeps me up, it's gonna be more about assimilating and how do we create longevity of member value. We haven't even scratched the surface yet in our portfolio of running multiple businesses in a business, the retail business, the food and beverage business. I mean, we're doing the basics, okay, but we haven't tapped into huge purchasing opportunities and gaining the leverage of what we can do there. We've ramped up, and many great outstanding leaders we've been through relationships of our executive senior team, so that's been great. But at some point, even that slows down. Right now you're making bets on people off resumes, so that keeps me up a little bit, versus people that I've been in wars with in the past 20 years, right? And at the end of the day, this business still, it's hand-to-hand combat. You're still, at least in the private club business and the publics, I think, you're dealing and competing in a 5, 10, 15-mile radius, right? The power of the brand and the network is great, but we don't overemphasize it with Heritage. It's still the club brand. You know, we may say a Heritage Club, very small down, and we only highlight that for the sake of what Jody needs to do to help on acquisitions, or for what we need to do to potentially create a network product. But at the end of the day, members want to know that their club's the deal, right? And that we're going to invest in their club, and that they're the most important thing. So right now, it's about our focus for the next couple of years. We still want to continue on the acquisition track, but we have to continue to get better operationally and tap in to all the opportunities to steal great ideas from the great restaurant chains. I mean, these F&B chains are doing phenomenal things, the indoor-outdoor type things, and the capital plays they're doing. So that's not our core business. My core business is how to keep members happy and member retention. Even adding new members is easier in my mind than retaining members from that standpoint. That's our core business. So now I've got to run multiple businesses, agronomy, great golf course products. If we're going to invest in capital, I need to know the management team can deal with that, and then I have the confidence that they can deliver what we think we can do on that basis. So it's really right now, it's going to be management execution, and as boring as that sounds, it's hard damn work. I mean, it's really hard work.
Sure. I think we've been really lucky. I think our portfolio is really second to none. We have low-end privates to high-end privates, low-end daily fees to mid-market to high-end daily fees. So we can take people through, a life cycle. We've got concentrations in big Western markets like Phoenix, DFW, these kinds of things. So I think we've executed on all of those kinds of things. My big fear is, where's the world headed? What do we need to do to stay relevant for the next customer up? Because right now we're in the private business a lot of times on the high-end side. You've got guys who are around the club that look like me. In some of our other clubs, you've got guys that look like my kids. And how do I stay relevant with them? And it's coming up with what is that next idea? Where do we invest in this business, in our portfolio, not just for the growth, but to have these things, these clubs that we own be sustainable. They're going on 30 some odd years old now, a lot of big infrastructure investment opportunities or needs. So yeah, those are the kind of things that keep me up. A big concentration in the West. What are we doing with sustainability, with water? I want to know where those things are headed so we know where to invest our capital in the future.
Well, I'll tell you what, I don't think this has changed over the years, but maybe highlights. I won't repeat what these two guys shared because that's probably those are the most important aspects of risk and what to be thinking about. Peter Ubroth said it best at one of these conferences when he said you need two at the top, one to watch government and one to watch the business. And I've said this before on panels with these guys, and I firmly believe this. It was so penetrating when you think about the risks associated with government, because they can turn your world upside down fast. So you never know what policy changes, water, precious resources, golf. We should never take our eye. Everybody in this room should contribute toward the lobbying and what's necessary to keep our industry very, very healthy. And we employ almost 2% of all working Americans in the country, so we're not an insignificant industry. We're bigger than the motion picture industry, for instance. Lots of big businesses were much bigger. We don't get that credit. And I'm talking about economic contribution to the economy and how we make that flywheel turn. At the same time, the things that are outside of our control are Mother Nature, which leads us to the next subject of risk, which is insurance, and how we cover, and how we stay covered, and what your risk profile is, and whether or not you can cover your self-insured portion of your asset base. And I'm speaking not just for myself, I am, because we dodged a bullet this last week at Fripp, but you just never know. And we're exposed, and we have a large exposure, and we can chug it, but we couldn't chug it 2 years or 3 years in a row without feeling some significant pain. So we don't want to be Pollyannish about that risk. So insurance and Mother Nature, like I've said, she's been a partner with us for 40 years, and there are years when she's better than others as a partner, but you don't get to control her. And it's interesting how weather has more to do with the financial outputs of your operations than anything that management could possibly do. But I think Mark touched on something very important when he was talking about looking at a resume or hiring. You have to keep in mind, when the three of us were getting into the business in the late 80s, mid 80s, golf was very vibrant. It was a very attractive industry. It was recruiting the best kids out of the best colleges, not just from the golf side, but from the management and leadership side, and the business side, real estate. I could have vectored, maybe even made more money if I had been more successful. I'd have gone into real estate. I don't know. But at the time, the golf option was so appealing because it was such a wonderful business and it involved people and all the dynamics that real estate doesn't have. It had the real estate dynamic, but it had so much more to offer. We went through a period where this industry didn't attract any talent. So you're looking at the old timers now. The industry, the best thing about what we've seen since the industry's recovered is it's starting to attract talent. There is not a more labor and management intensive business on the planet, including the hospitality business. There's no business more management and labor intensive. You could have 2 customers out or 2 members out and still have 100 people on your property every day, and you know it. You can't ratchet back and cover all your expenses and get them inside of an envelope that makes sense for 2 customers on a rainy day. So we're in a very high fixed cost business, which requires really smart, disciplined people to motivate, on one hand, your workforce to get the job done, on the other hand, to be able to have the discipline necessary to reduce the expenses when you get into that tough situation, whether it be weather or something else. So I'm just saying, this is not an easy business to manage, and it needs to attract talent. And where that talent comes from is going to be very important. One of the reasons I sold when I did was I did not see the ability to attract and offer a compelling career experience for somebody coming out of business school in 2014. I see that very differently now, as both these guys have alluded to. And I think I speak for the 1,200 courses that are in my channel in the Western US who I sell to, who all are very bullish about what's going on in the industry right now. But I think to Mark's point, finding talent, because David Price used to always say, that is such a great acquisition, but who's gonna run it? Somebody has to run this stuff, and it can't be the three of us.
So, to large acquisitions and the complexity, Mark, walk through Lakewood Ranch and just kind of the discovering it, closing it, you know, how you feel about it in general.
Is that good in here?
Steve's back there. Is he
No, the competitive process, Steve did a great job. SMR was the seller on the deal, big developer. It hits a lot of criteria of what we looked for. Amazing demographics. You start with that location, 54-hole private club, amazing amenities, 20 tennis courts, 20 pickleball courts. I'm not even sure what square footage, I should know the fitness, amazingly large with multiple group exercise rooms. You know, 2 clubhouses and strong private events in the main clubhouse. Really a lot of great things that occurred that SMR did, probably better than what most developers that you see. I love buying from developers. They generally undermanaged, overexpensed from a standpoint because they're doing, it's a loss leader for them, right? They're trying to sell the real estate around the golf course. So that is always a prime opportunity for us from that standpoint. In this case, in their minds, the assets were in pretty good shape. In my mind, all kinds of opportunity from a capital standpoint to make the members excited, which in doing that, that allows, if done properly, and you know, for moderate to aggressive dues increases. The downside of the deal was of 54 holes, bylaws written with caps of 350 per 18-hole clubs. So 1,050 total members. Well, they were full from that standpoint with a wait list of 100 people to join, and had already put deposits down, which we're seeing in many places in the Southeast, for sure, Florida, and clubs that are positioned correctly. We took the tack, and you know, look, I gotta give a lot of props to Jody back there who works for us and helps drive our deal flow. There was a public course literally right outside the gates. If you know the market, it's called Legacy Golf Course. That is a public course. And quite honestly, we overpaid for it, and we structured a deal to where I had that on the hook at the same time. It was a competitive bid process. The SMR, every situation of seller, this is really key in doing deals. What is their goal? Okay? What do they want after the transaction? Do they just want to retire and go off in the sunset and it's all about price? Or is it about who is going to be there that still is going to have representation, okay, for what their goals are? And in this case, it was very, very important to them who was going to be operating these clubs, because it has an impact on their real estate sales. There's still 20,000 more homes to be built and developed in the Lakewood Ranch area. It's an amazing, you know, market from that standpoint, demographics through the roof. So getting the 4th course was really key for us, along with Steve continuing to urge me to overpay for the deal, which we gladly did. And but in this case, 1 + 1 truly made not just 3, but it's going to make 4. The results this year, just 7 months through the roof on initiation fees. We were to take the 100 people that were on the wait list already. We took up initiation fees. We closed 2 of the 4 courses down for full, complete turf renovations. We've already added 4 tennis, or in process of adding more racket, all new fitness equipment. So capital is going to be hard and heavy. This is not it's a big bet financially. It's not a hard bet for me from the economics of what the indicators are of what needs to be done. When you can overlay quickly, and we hope to get full with the other 4th course with another 350 golf members, plus all kinds of room for more social programming. Here's the other aspect, being under, you know, I'm careful with what I say, I won't say undermanaged. Being opportunistic for better management at the club presents all kinds of member programming opportunities to delight the members, to give them more things that they feel great about it, and that they're, you know, they're coming to something that they can be even more proud of to bring their families and friends in. You know, member surveys there were not great. We love that situation because the bar is low, right? And, you know, so far so good. It's 7 months in, but, it's gonna be a really good one for us, and we're excited about it. Love to have you, you know, if any of you are visiting, love to take a tour of it, but it's a special place.
Andy, what you want through Greyhawk?
Well, Greyhawk was a package, and I'll touch on something that Mark brought up, which is, you know, he said he overpaid. Well, a lot of the industry might have said you overpaid, but you didn't overpay because of what you just described. And I think everybody from the outside looking in says, oh, they overpaid for that. But courses are worth more to some people than others, and some companies to others for all kinds of reasons. And that was the case with what we did with Pack Life when we got Greyhawk and Terrace Creek and Angel Park. And those were 3 iconic clubs in markets that we already had a presence, where we wanted to expand that presence. And it was a perfect deal for us. So yeah, people said, gosh, how could you guys pay that much? Well, that's why, because it fit what we were trying to do as a company in our growth strategy. Are there opportunities? Absolutely. Pack Life had professional management in all of those clubs, but we still found that they were somewhat distracted or goal diffused, and we found opportunity because, you know, asset light models and managers are there, you know, for fees, and while they're trying to maximize the returns and the experience and things like this, it really, you know, it's not their money. When you're an owner and you're running it and it's your money, you're a lot more careful. So there was opportunity in all those. We also had a lot of capital that we wanted to put in those assets to take them to the next level. So Greyhawk, for example, really special place in North Scottsdale. We're about ready to redo all the dining, add different features to the club to make more entertainment venues and things like this. So it fit a lot of what we wanted to do, and we were happy to pay up. We were, as Mark said, I was happy to overtake for that and get it. Also a public process, or a competitive public process. So they did care about who they sold to. Surety of closure is a big deal when you're doing deals. Are you going to close? Are you going to retrade me? And we've never done that, and our reputation speaks for itself. So great ad for us.
One other thing I'd add that probably flows for Lakewood as well as Greyhawk, I mean, with your exposure in Phoenix, the amount of inventory you have there, to allow another competitor into an iconic property, you know, one, potentially can disrupt, it's a disruptor for you.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Two, from the standpoint now, you know, overpaying can be viewed in a number of different ways, but with other inventory there and the ability to how that benefits other clubs. Sometimes that may be part of an underwriting exercise that we go through. At Lakewood, we had TPC Prestancy, a wonderful 36-hole club in Sarasota that does outstanding, our second most profitable club in the portfolio. We had to also take into consideration, what if irrational management or ownership got into Lakewood, and how would that impact one of our best assets? And so again, at least from a multi-management strategy, a lot of times that factors in. You know, we've done deals where if we do it, you know, we've got a 2-club deal that we're doing in a market where we already have one. Part of the underwriting may be that helps the clubs we already have also grow exponentially, factoring that into the underwriting. So there's a lot of tentacles into the analysis.
Yeah, no, that's a terrific point, Mark. It really is, because our subscription model in DFW in Phoenix is how we're driving such success. And we originally held Greyhawk out of that subscription model, still not in there. We want to make sure that it remains one of the iconic properties in the Valley. So it was a big part of the equation is to say, how do we continue to add to the subscription model that we've created?
So let's talk about financing, lack thereof, interest rates being high. How has that impacted your growth? I mean, Mark, 31 clubs in 4 years, bad. I mean, I hear it all the time. There's no money, there's no debt out there for golf. How's that affected your growth? How do you see that
It
affecting?
hasn't affected us because we don't use one-off financing we've got a institutional financing, so it doesn't really affect us, but what it does do is as we effectively and purposefully manage our portfolio, we're selling some clubs and we're buying some clubs, so we're always actively managing the portfolio. And on the sell side, we really want to help those guys, those groups of doctors or other investors in some of these markets find financing. So it has impacted that side of the business, I think, a little bit, Billy. Hasn't affected our growth at all, but I think it's starting to come back a little bit, and Joe can probably touch on that a little bit.
Well, I think there's a huge opportunity to create a senior debt lender in the industry. It's something that my partners and I are talking about. Challenge is we don't really want to do a deal with private equity. We've been there and done that, and they're great partners and we did very well. But we're at a stage where we want to only do deals with our own capital. So we're working on that. But here's the hypothesis. You put 25% of our own equity in. We borrow from a conventional warehouse line, say 3-to-1. You put it together and you lend on a sensible basis at a 65 to 70% loan to value, non-recourse. We don't care what an appraiser says. We use our own underwriting capacity because we've been running golf courses for 20 years, and we make the loan. And the bank's happy to do it because they have less than 50% equity in the deal, because our equity and the borrower's equity is in front of their equity. And they don't have a lot of equity in anyway because they're borrowing at the Fed fund window. So it's actually a pretty elegant, simple solution to a complicated problem. We were ready to launch in 2020, and we're thinking maybe it's time to hit the reset button on that business initiative. One little problem, we're back to who's gonna run it. I don't wanna run it. So we have to figure out the whys and wherefores if we do decide to go forward. I think that golf is going to remain strong for decades. I am a firm believer that it is it's more than an addiction. People call it a bug. That was a nice way of calling golf an addiction. But I honestly believe it's a behavioral mutation, genetic mutation. And by the way, scientists are now finding all kinds of correlations to religion, divorce, sexual preference, all born out of mutation of DNA and genes. So why shouldn't there be? It's interesting because golf is relevant to about 12 to 15% of the North American population base. When I say relevant, it means they have an affinity for it when they get the ball in the air. The balance do not, and we don't know why. So you can even take a golf-centric family, and not everybody in that family is going to want to play golf. Long way of saying that I have confidence that I don't think this is a bloom on the rose that will go away. I actually think that the improvement we've seen is very sustainable. What happened was the entrance point to golf became much broader with all of the off-course golf venues like Topgolf, plus social media. It's interesting, Ken and I were looking back at social media at 17 and 18. We'd see Zaire Golf with some idiot driving a golf cart with a cigar in his mouth into a lake, and he would get 100,000 likes. And Titleist would put a marquee player up and get 5,000. It's interesting how, and it was born out of this goofy golf, it became entertainment, and then social influencers started playing the game. So I feel like we're going to be in a very solid growth round, which would be very conducive to the lending business that I just suggested. So hopefully more on that in the future, but I'm very bullish, and I think that onesie-twosie, just going to the SBA window every single time and putting your personal guarantee without, a way to exit without paying a huge termination fee is not the way to go. And since there's very little competition on the debt side, it seems like the right time to get into that business.
Well, you guys want to take some questions?
Happy to.
So you guys have been around long enough to remember 2008, and I'm surprised that none of you mentioned that as something that keeps you up at night. And I don't blame you, because it looks like we're possibly in for a soft landing. That nothing as hard as 2008 at least. But that must have caused a lot of blips in your projections at the time. And your projections had to assume that the members from Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers and all the banks would keep paying their membership dues, and they probably didn't. So could you comment on that?
My view is, I think full understanding and discipline around the balance sheet is crucial in leverage. And, we talked about interest rates, and yeah, it's no fun with a little bit of raise, and, it impacts a little bit of cash moderately, at the level that we were at. But we're in a position, we're levered under 4 times. I think if in our business, we've seen days, with private equity, you could get levered up 7, 8 times, crazy numbers, right?
Yeah.
To your point, which puts you in a position that can be a problem. When you disciplined and you can get deal structures done, and you can get your debt partner, or however you structure that, in the proper way, the private club model, I think withholds really well. I was at Club Corp at the time. Was it fun? No. But our peak to trough from 07, 08 to 10, on the golf side, now I'm not gonna talk about the city club side of the business, there were city clubs that were non-golf related that took a bigger hit, and their dues were lower, and there was a different model on that. But on the golf side, it's the last thing people want to leave if you're doing your jobs and you're doing operations right? It's your home and your family, it's work. Your third place is your club. It's where you're getting experiences, where you get memories, it's where your kids are learning things, it's where they have friends, it's where you have friends. And what we saw was a very moderate decrease in dues. So I think it's one of the reasons, to your point, I like the defensiveness of the private club model. And to your point, it's worrisome. No one likes to go through that, but fully feel comfortable about how we're structuring the organization on the balance sheet and debt side to be able, if things happen, no slowdown, some mass things happen globally, all those things that become a disruptor, that we're able to work through that and come out the other end in a good place. And again, being in a position where if you're capitalizing clubs correctly, your members stick with you a little bit more if you're really trying to do the right job.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. We're levered properly today. Back in 07, 08, we were doing deals at 80, sometimes 90% leverage, and we came through that. And so we underwrite to normal economic conditions, normal weather conditions. So, we have to be bullish from that standpoint, not try and time the market or, underwrite to catastrophes that are unrealized.
Right.
Yes, sir.
My question's for Joe, but I'd love any input that any of you have on it. You mentioned you feel that golf will remain strong for decades. And my question is, do you think that golf as an activity and an industry has broadened and diversified its reach to the point where it can have sustainable growth as the COVID surge subsides?
Well, for sure. First of all, we saw the uptick in golf at every level way pre-COVID. It was around 17 or 18. I'd say the bottom point of golf was 15, 16, and we started recovering. Keep in mind, supply-demand was put back into equilibrium as well. The country is largely built out. We're not going to see golf courses built in suburban areas either. So we rode a very large surge in growth of supply during that period of time also, which contributed to the decline. So that's been cleaned up permanently. And the courses being built now are either logical extensions to existing facilities or what I call the Billionaire Boys Club properties that are in the middle of nowhere. They're spending a couple $100 million and getting 500,000 to $1 million in ID for a whole totally different reason. That's not for the masses. But I do think it is. It's diversified. It's become much more relevant to a much broader spectrum of potential players. It's interesting how you see, surfers and skaters with tats and earrings on the golf course with beers in their side pocket of their bag, and that's how it starts. But they get invited to go play a fancy private equity club or and all of a sudden they subordinate right to whatever those rules and regulations are because they got the message and they have the mutation, so they're out there and they want to play. So it doesn't necessarily take away from the experience because they have to subordinate to the more rigorous rules and regs we have at certain clubs, even though many of those clubs have relaxed them. So that's very validating to me with respect to the attraction and retention and the growth of the game. And I think that when you put, it's a confluence of factors, it's not any single one. So we go through COVID and we still have not seen, a sharp drop. If there were any drops in round volume, it had to do with people taking golf trips over to Europe or somewhere else. It's just that they weren't playing at home, but we've not really seen any deterioration or ratcheting back of round volume from the entry-level clubs right up to the private clubs, and certainly the private equity clubs, which we have all the data on. It's just solid, and so it's very validating. I'm not saying that there couldn't be some catastrophic externality in the environment, like a war or something really bad that wouldn't change that. But the way it looks now and today, assuming it is addictive, assuming that it's that 20% that spend 80% of the dollars, and they're in our channel, they're here to stay. And the other thing that is also validating is Gen X and the millennials are willing to splurge and spend more on lifestyle, which bodes very well for clubs. Look at all these factors and say, okay, if you're gonna place a bet, I think it's a safer bet to assume that the business will stay healthy rather than retreat.
Yeah, I agree. I would add to that part of staying relevant for long periods of time, and I think we saw this back in the late 90s. Billy had asked, I think earlier when we were out talking, what's the best time you've seen? Are we in it now? I think we all agreed back then you didn't have to do anything. You didn't have to put a flower in front of your clubhouse, whether your greens had grass on them or not. But you open the tee sheet, we could have manual tee sheets. Whatever you did, tee sheets were full, and we probably didn't take price hard enough because of it at the time. As the downturn happened, which was clearly all real estate driven, every developer was wanting to build a new golf course, into the late 90s and the early 2000s, which created the oversupply. What really happened, and what gives me confidence going forward, is it forced competition. It forced creative thinking. It forced golf to come out of its shell. And one of the most archaic, behind the scenes, for clubs and operators, all of us. And we had to get better because we had to start competing. And that's where new ideas came out. F&B reinventions, looking at restaurant concepts, and how do we at least attempt to emulate some of these new cool things that members will start giving us more wallet share from that standpoint. How do we build new amenities and compete more with bigger fitness boxes and different things to do? And it was forced upon us. I think going forward at this point, what the creative, now so many things are just the ante to get in the game just to even be relevant. I mean, pickleball was the latest one here, right? Now all of a sudden you're seeing it everywhere. Now, if you don't have it, members are looking at you, okay, well, that's interesting, why? And all these type of things. That's gonna continue. There's gonna be new trends, and I think a lot of it is what Joe just said. It's gonna be the Gen X, it's gonna be that 20, 30 something, when their income levels get to where they have more disposable income, okay? What are the needs and the wants gonna be? Our clubs are gonna have to be changing. Yeah, I look at it in 5-year cycles. Reinventions, we can throw a $2 million capital investment into reinvent part of our club. That very well may need to be tweaked, modified, updated again in 5 years because trends are changing. And as long as our industry and as long as the majority of clubs are competing for market share and wallet share, we all will ride that tide, assuming we're positioned correctly.
Yeah, I mean, hard to add to anything that these guys have said, all true. The only thing I would say is that I think contraction of the supply has been one of the big keys to help us, undoubtedly. And that was necessary, and it's finally happened, and we're reaping the benefits of that now. That is sustainable.
I think I've sold courses to all of you guys, but Andy, this question is for
thank you, Ken.
because this is kind of the a buy-sell pattern. It's something you've mentioned today. that really has been focused is the decision to sell. What drives your decision to sell? What market conditions, what equilibrium do you guys get to where you make the decision you can't take it any further? And what is the multiple that you want to sell it?
What is the multiple? I'm not gonna answer that one, Ken, but what I can say is that when we think something is kind of, not reached its, end of its useful life, but if we took the equity that we have in Club X and recycled it into Club Y, into a better, portfolio dynamic, you know, is that ultimately beneficial? And that really drives our decision. So do we want to sell, you know, two mid-market to low-market daily fees in order to take that equity and recycle it into something like a Greyhawk? Absolutely. So actively managing the portfolio, I think, is just good business.
My take would be a little different, and probably around the life cycle of our companies. With where we're at and what we're trying to establish and creating what the new heritage really is all about. My COO back in the way back there, Jim Oliver, may correct me, but I think out of the 37 deals, we've only got 3 that are potentially at this point either somewhat, you know, moderately underperforming pro forma objectives. My view, there's no reason. I wouldn't want to sell right now in this environment from a standpoint of, if we're in growth mode, I don't want the reputation, I don't want the baggage. It's one key thing that many sellers ask, if they're still somehow gonna be tied to the club afterwards. And from that standpoint, if, you know, look, everything can be for sale, I'm not saying we won't, but where we're at in our growth mode of the organization and the company, it's not necessary for us. And as long as it has some strategic value to us, you know, we're in a position right now that, to me, that would be a deterrent to what our ultimate goals are, you know, for growth. Now, that may change 5 years from now. And, you know, as more and more clubs mature, which Arcus has been at it longer than what we've been at it, and they've probably got more clubs that, you know, have reached, quote, some level of maturity. But again, if structured properly, balance sheets are set up right, and, you know, you're able to somehow, you know, be able to monetize the greater good of what a network can be, you know, I view it also really no interest at this point.
Yeah, no, those are great points about the life cycle. CapEx needs also play into it, and I mean, if infrastructure, significant infrastructure is on the way out, and we would, you know, we weigh that against what could you get in the open market for it, how much equity could you recycle, or do you want to spend X millions of dollars trying to keep the business that you have? That's also a big part of the equation.
I think there's a lot of reasons that different motivation for multi-course owners when compared to, particularly if they're private equity backed. Private equity sometimes steers that shot because they get long in the tooth in the investment, need to monetize, take their LPs out, invest the money in something else, or the fund's coming to an end. That was one of our situations, one of the situations we had with Parthenon, where we had been in that deal for 10 years. They'd like to be 5. There was a recession in the middle of it, which extended it, so we hung in there. But, you know, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end to an investor's cycle. I think individual owners, there's a variety of reasons. Let's say that their debt is coming to maturity, and interest rates when they borrowed were at 2.5%, and now they're at 7%. Well, they could still probably chug it, but the way that their lifestyle worked and the cash flows they were getting at 2.5% to 3%, they don't see how that works at 7%. We do, because we can add value. You know, we just have a different view of the world when it comes to that particular asset. So it may be time. There are other fatigue issues that come into play with owners where they're tired. They've owned it for a long time. They've reaped a lot of profit. Maybe it's getting heavier and more difficult to lift. A lot of times they get very attached to their employees, and they find it difficult to make the change in leadership, and it's easier for them to sell than to disappoint their leadership team and having to make changes, and or they don't know where to go because they've owned it for 20, 30 years, and you know, it's always been that way. It's been a family asset. So There's a lot of different reasons. The good news is they're not always the same, and there's always movement and transaction in this industry. It's never been stagnant, you know? The only time it really gets stagnant is when interest rates really spike and nobody wants to drop prices. You heard it for those that were sitting in the meeting this morning. The only reason you would sell, if you felt like you had to sell at a discount because interest rates were up, would be because you're coming to term or something like that. Otherwise, you wouldn't sell. So there's so many variables in when people sell and what they're willing to sell for. It's hard to pinpoint that in a single theme.
Anyone else?
You know, one thing to add, I think it's a huge plus for both multi-course owners, as well as individual owners, or, you know, individuals that may wanna, you know, do a onesie, twosie, threesie pack or what have you. It's, you know, just how fragmented the industry is. I mean, if you still take the Inviteds, you take the Arcuses and Heritage and Concerts and, you know, anybody that's multi-course, is still such a small faction of the 16,000 or whatever the count is these days of total golf courses and 4,000 privates. Now granted, you gotta carve that back and look at, you know, the demographic and how is that in certain, you know, primary, secondary, and tertiary population income level markets that maybe are interesting, but everyone has different needs, wants, and what those are. That's why, to me, it's easy to compete against each other, but to also root for each other. And, you know, we need us all to do good, individual operators, because the pie is pretty big out there. And there, you know, we've all come to these conferences and, you know, you get nuggets, you get things that recharge you from it. You get ideas that, yeah, I heard that 10 years ago. But at the end of the day, there's not a lot of new, completely crazy new ideas that just overnight you can take and monetize. It's the discipline and how you execute. And, you know, with fragmentation of the space in the industry, if you get your capital structure right, it sure is a fun place to play and have a passion. You know, for me, it's just clearly about being able to do something that I'm passionate about. I love sports. I love that environment, and to apply business level concepts and to be able to do that environment versus selling chips or, you know, other things which wouldn't interest me as much. It's a cool space.
Anyone else? Jack, how are you on time?
Excellent, good job. Well done. Well done.
Mark, thank you.
I looked at us.
Yeah, you know, one thing about things is, you gotta shoot your thoughts.